I paid the bills when they couldn't breathe without panicking. I stayed quiet when my needs became inconvenient. I absorbed their fear, their debt, their anger, and called it love. I watched them grow stronger while I learned how to shrink. Then one day, I heard my own life retold without me in it. Not as a partner. Not as a sacrifice. As a footnote they were embarrassed to remember. And that was the moment everything irreversible began. My name is Daniel. I was 36 years old when the story of my life was rewritten without my consent. I worked as a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm in Portland, a job that paid steadily but demanded long hours and an even steadier spine. I wasn't flashy, but I was reliable in the way people lean on without realizing they're putting their full weight on you. The relationship that would come to define the quietest revenge of my life had lasted nearly 9 years. Long enough that our habits replaced romance. Long enough that our future felt assumed instead of chosen. When we met, they were drowning. That's not an insult. It's just the truth. Late 20s, brilliant in bursts, but paralyzed by uncertainty and a constant sense of being behind. Jobs came and went. Confidence evaporated under pressure. Bills stacked like evidence of failure. I stepped in slowly at first, the way you do when you don't want to scare someone already afraid. I covered rent 1 month. Then 2. I handled phone calls they avoided. I reminded them they were capable when they forgot. Over time, it stopped feeling like help and started feeling like maintenance. I didn't announce my sacrifices. I didn't keep score. I believed that love was something you did, not something you documented. When they went back to school in their early 30s, we agreed I'd shoulder most of the expenses. It was temporary, we said. An investment in us. I remember standing in the kitchen one night, calculating which bills could be delayed without penalty, while they studied at the table, anxious and grateful and full of dreams. I told myself this was what partnership looked like. The imbalance wasn't loud. It was subtle. Decisions defaulted to me. Emotional regulation became my responsibility. If they were stressed, I adjusted. If they were distant, I waited. If I was tired, I swallowed it. Over the years, I noticed how often my needs were postponed with promises that never quite materialized. Not maliciously, just conveniently forgotten. I learned to ask for less so I wouldn't feel like a burden. The betrayal didn't arrive with shouting or infidelity. It arrived as a story told at a dinner party I wasn't invited to. I found out later through someone who assumed I already knew. They had been talking about their journey, their grind, their years of struggle. The room listened, impressed. And in that carefully edited narrative, I had been reduced to a vague mention. A supportive presence. A roommate. Someone who was around. It shouldn't have hurt the way it did. But it did. Because I recognized the story. It was mine. My sacrifices. My patience. My stability. Just told without my name attached. When I finally confronted them, it wasn't dramatic. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning while coffee brewed between us. I asked calmly why I wasn't part of the story anymore. They looked confused at first, then defensive. They said they didn't mean anything by it. That they needed to own their narrative. That people wouldn't understand the context if they explained everything. That my role was implied. Implied. As if years of emotional labor could be reduced to an assumption. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just listened as the illusion dissolved. In that moment I saw how comfortable they were standing on ground I had leveled, while pretending they'd done it alone. The conversation ended with them assuring me I was overthinking it. That I was too sensitive. That we were fine. Something in me went quiet after that. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just done. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped filling the silence. I stopped anticipating needs before they were voiced. The begging stopped because I realized I had been begging for recognition I would never receive. Over the following weeks, I began to reclaim small things. My time. My money. My emotional energy. I updated boundaries without announcing them. I let them feel the absence of support without framing it as punishment. I watched silently as confusion replaced entitlement. They asked what was wrong. I told them nothing was wrong. I was just tired. The turning point came when they introduced me to someone new as a friend. Not maliciously. Casually. As if redefining me required no discussion. I smiled. I shook hands. And I understood with absolute clarity that staying would mean erasing myself. So I left. Not with accusations. Not with ultimatums. I moved my things out over a weekend while they were away, leaving behind a letter that contained no anger. Just facts. Just boundaries. Just the truth they had already chosen to live without. By the time they realized what they'd lost, there was nothing left to negotiate. I didn't take revenge by destroying them. I took it by withdrawing access. By refusing to be the unseen foundation beneath someone else's success. By choosing dignity over explanation. The lesson wasn't about betrayal. It was about self-respect. About understanding that love without acknowledgement is just labor. And labor unpaid and uncredited eventually ends. The first few weeks after I left were unnervingly quiet. Not peaceful, quiet in the way a room feels after furniture has been removed, when the echoes remind you of what used to be there. I moved into a small one-bedroom on the east side of the city, closer to work, farther from memory. I bought only what I needed. A bed. A table. A chair by the window. I didn't decorate. I wanted the space to feel earned, not inherited. They reached out within days. At first, it was practical questions disguised as concern. Where did I put the insurance documents? Did I change the streaming passwords by accident? Could I forward a package that arrived for them? I responded politely, briefly, without emotion. Each reply felt like tightening a boundary one line at a time. Then the tone shifted. They asked if we could talk. Not to argue. Just to understand. I declined. I said there was nothing left to clarify. That I had explained myself already. That the silence was intentional. It was the first time I had ever denied them access to my inner world, and I could almost feel the power shift through the phone. They didn't take it well. Mutual friends started calling. People who had once admired our stability now spoke carefully, as if unsure which version of events was real. I heard fragments of the rewritten story through them. That the relationship had run its course. That I had been supportive but distant. That they had outgrown me. I noticed how often the language centered on their growth, their courage, their independence. I was no longer the one who carried them. I was the weight they had shed. And strangely, I wasn't angry. I was relieved. Because every time they minimized me publicly, they revealed something privately. Not to others but to themselves. They needed the narrative to survive. I didn't. The real revenge began without planning. It started with me no longer being available to stabilize their life. They struggled with decisions they had once outsourced to me. Financial choices became overwhelming. Emotional setbacks lingered longer without my quiet reassurance. I heard, through the same channels that once minimized me, that they were burned out. That success felt emptier than expected. That independence was heavier than it looked from the outside. They reached out again months later. This time the message was longer. Apologetic but vague. They said they missed me. That they finally understood how much I had done. That they had been young and scared. That they were ready to talk now, really talk. They asked if we could meet. I read the message twice. Then I deleted it. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. Because the apology wasn't for me. It was for the discomfort of losing someone who had made life easier. They didn't miss me. They missed the version of themselves that existed when I was holding everything together. My life, meanwhile, had grown quieter in a different way. I took on fewer projects at work but did them better. I stopped volunteering for emotional labor in every room I entered. I learned how to sit with discomfort instead of fixing it. Friends noticed the change. They said I seemed steadier. Less reactive. More present. I wasn't trying to be strong. I was just no longer leaking energy into places that didn't return it. The most unexpected moment came at a professional networking event almost a year later. I was there with a colleague nursing a drink when I heard my name behind me. I turned and saw them standing there, dressed sharply, confidence carefully assembled. For a moment we simply looked at each other. They smiled first. Practiced smile. The kind that suggests closure without accountability. "This is awkward," they said lightly. "But it's good to see you." I nodded. "You too." They introduced me to someone they were with, a new partner I assumed. They described their current role, their accomplishments, their journey. And then, without prompting, they added, "Daniel was really supportive back in the day. Helped me get through some tough years." Back in the day. I felt something then. Not rage. Not sadness. Just distance. The kind that comes from seeing someone clearly for the first time. I smiled politely and said nothing. I didn't correct them. I didn't expand the truth. I let their version stand thin and incomplete, because I no longer needed recognition from someone who could only offer it in fragments. When we parted ways, they lingered, as if waiting for something. An invitation. A softening. A sign that they still mattered to me in the way they once had. I walked away. That was the moment I understood the full shape of the revenge. It wasn't about them realizing what they'd lost. It was about me no longer needing them to. Their power over me had depended entirely on my willingness to stay unseen. Once I withdrew that, there was nothing left for them to leverage. They could tell the story however they wanted. I had already stepped out of it. At night, in my small apartment, I sometimes thought about the years I spent holding someone else together. I didn't regret them. Regret implies waste. Those years taught me how strong I could be, and how dangerous it was to give that strength away without boundaries. The peace I felt wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It arrived slowly in the absence of anxiety, in the way my body no longer braced when my phone buzzed, in the fact that my life finally felt like it belonged to me. The last time I heard about them, it was indirectly. A mutual acquaintance mentioned they had moved again. New city. New job. Another restart framed as reinvention. The tone was familiar, admiring, cautious, incomplete. I listened without interrupting, then changed the subject. Not because it hurt, but because it no longer mattered. Their movement through the world no longer intersected with mine, and that was the point. What surprised me most wasn't how easily I let go of them. It was how much of myself I found waiting on the other side of that decision. Without realizing it, I had been living in a constant state of readiness. Ready to help, ready to absorb, ready to explain. When that stopped, space opened. And in that space, I learned who I was without the role I had been playing for nearly a decade. I started dating again slowly. Not out of loneliness, but curiosity. I paid attention to how people responded to boundaries, to how they spoke about their past, to whether their stories included accountability or just resilience. The difference was subtle, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. I didn't rush intimacy. I didn't overextend. I noticed when something felt unbalanced and trusted that instinct instead of negotiating it away. At work, an opportunity came up to lead a long-term project in another state. It would mean a promotion, a pay increase, and a chance to build something from the ground up. Years ago, I would have hesitated. I would have considered how it affected someone else's comfort, someone else's fear of change. This time I said yes without consulting anyone. I signed the papers, packed my apartment, and left Portland with no ceremony. The move felt symbolic in ways I hadn't expected. Not dramatic, just clean. I didn't announce it to people who didn't need to know. I didn't post about it. I didn't frame it as a triumph. It was simply the next step in a life that finally felt self-directed. Months later, I received an email from them. Short. Measured. They said they had heard I moved, that they hoped I was well, that they wanted to apologize properly this time without defensiveness, that they understood now how much I had carried, and how unfair it had been to rewrite the past. They said they didn't expect a response, but wanted me to know they were grateful. I sat with the message longer than I expected, not because I was tempted to reply, but because I wanted to be honest with myself about what I felt. I felt nothing. Not numbness. Not suppression. Just neutrality. The kind that only comes after something has fully healed. I didn't respond. Not to punish them. Not to assert dominance. But because the chapter was closed, and reopening it, even gently, would have been unnecessary. Silence, I had learned, is not avoidance when it comes from wholeness. It's discernment. The real resolution didn't come from them acknowledging anything. It came from me no longer needing them to. Their apology, had it come earlier, might have changed the trajectory. Now, it was simply information arriving after relevance had expired. I built a life that no longer required translation. Friends who saw me. Work that respected my limits. Relationships where effort moved in both directions. I stopped proving I was valuable and started assuming it. The difference was immediate and profound. Sometimes I think about the version of myself who stayed quiet at that dinner party, unaware that his absence from a story would eventually become his liberation. I don't judge him. He did what he knew how to do with the information he had. But I'm grateful I didn't stay there. Grateful I chose to leave instead of shrinking further. Grateful I learned that dignity doesn't demand recognition. It demands boundaries. The quietest revenge isn't making someone regret losing you. It's becoming unreachable to the version of them that benefited from your self-erasure. They lost access to my labor, my loyalty, my emotional infrastructure. They lost the right to define me by omission. And I gained something far more permanent than vindication. I gained myself. That's the lesson I carry forward. Not that people will always betray you, but that when they do, you don't owe them an explanation of your worth. You don't need to correct their story. You just need to step out of it and write your own fully, honestly, and without apology. Because the moment you stop carrying someone who refuses to carry you back is the moment your life finally becomes light enough to move forward.